Autumn 1607. A mountain path in Iga Province. Two warriors face each other. One holds twin swords, blades that have never tasted defeat. The other wields something far more dangerous, a chain and sickle that can strike from distances no sword can reach. Miyamoto Musashi, the wandering swordsman with over 20 kills to his name, stands across from Shishido Baiken, the Kusarigama master who teaches his deadly art not in dojos, but in the wilderness where his weapon thrives. The chain begins to spin. The air fills with the sound of metal cutting through the crisp autumn breeze. This isn't a duel of honor. This is a duel of survival. Because when a Kusarigama master fights, terrain becomes weapon and distance becomes death. One of them will walk away. The other will never leave this mountain. This is the story of the duel that proved sometimes the most unconventional weapon meets the most unconventional swordsman. But before we dive into this legendary confrontation, if you're enjoying stories of legendary Japanese warriors and their weapons, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss our next video. We've already covered Musashi's legendary duel with Sasaki Kojiro, explored the fearsome Odachi, and journeyed through the world of dual katanas. Now, let's return to 1607 and witness how Musashi faced perhaps his most unconventional opponent yet. To understand this duel, you first need to understand the man wielding the chain. Shishido Baiken remains one of history's most enigmatic figures. Unlike the noble samurai immortalized in scrolls and paintings, Baiken operated in the shadows. He wasn't a dojo master with a prestigious lineage. He was something far more dangerous. A teacher who trained his students in the fields and mountains where real combat happens. The historical record is frustratingly sparse. The first mention of him appears in the Nitenki, written in 1776, almost 170 years after his death, where he's simply called Shishido Nanigashi, which essentially means Shishido someone. His full name, Baiken, was popularized by novelist Eiji Yoshikawa in the 1930s. But what we do know paints a picture of a formidable warrior. Baiken was a master of the Kusarigama, a weapon that combined a curved sickle blade with a weighted chain, typically 9 to 12 feet long. While samurai trained with swords in structured environments, Baiken had perfected a weapon that turned any open space into a killing ground. The chain could entangle swords, limbs, even necks. The sickle could slash, hook, and grapple. And the weighted end? That could crush skulls or wrap around throats. Some accounts suggest he taught as a ninja instructor in Iga Province, the heartland of covert warfare. Whether this is true or romantic embellishment, one thing was certain. Baiken understood combat in a way most swordsmen didn't. He understood that a battlefield wasn't a flat training ground. It was chaos. And in chaos, the Kusarigama reigned supreme. By 1607, Baiken had built a reputation as a man who defeated swordmasters. His unconventional weapon and unconventional methods had proven deadly time and again. And when word reached him of a young wandering swordsman cutting down challengers across Japan, Baiken became interested, very interested. Now let's talk about the young warrior walking into Baiken's territory. In 1607, Miyamoto Musashi was approximately 23 years old, though some sources suggest he could have been as young as 20. This was not yet the legendary sword saint who would write the Book of Five Rings. This was a hungry, restless ronin on a warrior's pilgrimage, a musha shugyo. After surviving the catastrophic Battle of Sekigahara in 1600 on the losing side, Musashi had become masterless. Rather than settle into obscurity, he chose the path of endless refinement. From 1605 onward, he wandered Japan with a singular purpose: to test his sword against anyone willing to face him. And he was winning, constantly. By 1607, Musashi had already defeated over 20 opponents in mortal combat. His most famous victories, the systematic destruction of the Yoshioka school in Kyoto, had occurred just years earlier. He had faced and killed Seijuro Yoshioka in a Baken duel, then defeated his brother Denshichiro. And finally, he'd fought off Matashichiro and dozens of armed Yoshioka students in a brutal ambush outside Kyoto. His reputation was spreading like wildfire across Japan. Here was a swordsman who fought with two swords, who showed up late to duels to unnerve opponents, who used psychological warfare as much as blade work. Musashi didn't just fight to win, he fought to dominate. But there was something different about Musashi during this period. He was still developing his philosophy, still testing theories. He had not yet achieved the mastery he would later become famous for. He was raw talent mixed with battlefield experience, driven by an almost obsessive need to prove his sword style worked against any opponent, with any weapon. As he traveled from Nara toward Edo in autumn 1607, Musashi's path would cross with Baiken's. Whether Baiken sought out Musashi or whether Musashi heard of the Kusarigama master and challenged him remains unclear. What is clear is that both men wanted this duel. Baiken wanted to humble the arrogant young swordsman. Musashi wanted to prove his swords could defeat any weapon, even one that defied the logic of traditional dueling. The confrontation happened on a mountain path near Baiken's training grounds in Iga Province, a remote area thick with forest and uneven terrain. This was not a formal duel ground. No witnesses, no seconds, just two warriors and the wilderness. And this would prove crucial. When Musashi arrived, some accounts suggest he first encountered Baiken's students, or possibly a young girl described as Baiken's disciple, who attempted an ambush with her own Kusarigama. Musashi evaded the surprise attack at the last moment, his battle-hardened instincts saving his life. Baiken himself emerged, calling off the ambush and telling his student not to interfere. This was how Baiken had defeated other challengers, through surprise attacks and disorientation. But Musashi was different. He had survived battlefields, assassinations, and ambushes. He didn't rattle easily. The two men faced each other properly. Musashi carried his two swords, his katana and his wakizashi, the shorter companion blade. Baiken held his kusarigama, the chain coiled in his grip, the weighted end ready to strike. Then the chain began to spin. This was the kusarigama's terror. Unlike a sword with its fixed reach, the chain could strike from 12 feet away. It could change direction mid-flight. It could wrap around a blade and render it useless. Baiken was a master of distance control, keeping opponents at bay while the chain did its deadly work. Musashi had to approach. But approaching meant entering the chain's kill zone. The duel erupted with violent intensity. Baiken's chain lashed out, and some accounts claim it caught Musashi's katana, wrapping around the blade, dulling or bending it. This was the Kusarigama's signature move, neutralizing the primary weapon. But this is where Musashi's two-sword style proved revolutionary. As the chain ensnared his long sword, Musashi didn't panic. He didn't try to wrench it free like countless swordsmen before him had done, a fatal mistake that always cost them their balance and their lives. Instead, Musashi did something unexpected. He released the pressure on his trapped katana and simultaneously drew his wakizashi, his short sword. In that split second, as Baiken prepared to finish the seemingly disarmed swordsman, Musashi closed the distance. The chain was extended, the weight at its far reach. Baiken's sickle was positioned for a follow-up strike. But Musashi was already inside the weapon's optimal range. The wakizashi, the blade samurai traditionally reserved for ritual suicide, became a killing weapon. There are differing accounts of exactly how the strike landed. Some say Musashi thrust the short blade directly into Baiken's torso. Others claim he struck at the neck or vital points with terrifying precision. What all accounts agree on is this: the blow was fatal, and it was immediate. Baiken collapsed. But even as their master fell, Baiken's students rushed at Musashi, weapons drawn, ready to avenge their teacher. This was the real test. A wounded Musashi, his primary sword potentially damaged, surrounded by multiple armed attackers in their own territory. Musashi responded with both blades now freed, the two-sword technique he'd been perfecting. The students saw something in Musashi's eyes, in the way he moved, in his absolute readiness to cut down every single one of them without hesitation. They fled, terrified. Some accounts suggest Musashi displayed almost supernatural speed and killing intent, wielding both swords in a whirlwind of steel that sent the students scrambling down the mountain path. So why do we still talk about this duel over 400 years later? First, because it validated Musashi's two-sword style against what was considered an almost unbeatable weapon. The Kusarigama had a legendary reputation for defeating swordsmen. Its range advantage, its ability to disarm opponents, and its unconventional attack patterns made it a nightmare matchup for traditional sword schools. Musashi proved that adaptability and unconventional thinking could overcome even the most unconventional weapon. Second, this duel demonstrated the core of Musashi's emerging philosophy. Don't be rigid. When his long sword was trapped, he didn't try to force the situation. He adapted instantly. This concept of flowing like water, of using whatever works in the moment, would later become central to his teachings in the Book of Five Rings. Third, the duel entered the canon of Musashi legends. While it's true that we can't be absolutely certain of Baiken's historical existence, the first written record appears 170 years after the fact. The story became part of how Japanese culture understood Musashi's journey. Real or embellished, it represented the wandering swordsman facing and defeating the unexpected. Did Musashi himself write about this fight? Interestingly, no. In the Book of Five Rings, written near the end of his life, Musashi mentions fighting over 60 duels, but rarely names specific opponents. He was more interested in extracting lessons than glorifying victories. But the duel with Baiken stuck in oral tradition and was recorded in the Nitenki, suggesting that witnesses or Musashi's later students considered it significant enough to preserve. The image of the young swordsman defeating the chain and sickle master became shorthand for intelligence overcoming unconventional threats. The Kusarigama itself would never be the same. After this duel, and others like it, the weapon's mystique faded. By the time Japan entered the peaceful Edo period, the Kusarigama became primarily a training weapon in martial arts schools, respected but no longer feared as it once was. In the mountains of Iga Province in 1607, two philosophies of combat collided. One believed in the supremacy of the unconventional weapon, the chain that could reach where swords couldn't, the sickle that could hook and slash in ways katanas couldn't. The other believed in the supremacy of adaptability, the mind that could read combat in real time, the warrior who carried multiple tools and knew when to abandon one for another. Musashi walked away from that mountain. Baiken did not. And in doing so, Musashi added another layer to what would become his legendary status. Not just as a swordsman, but as a tactical genius who understood that the greatest weapon wasn't in your hands, it was in your mind. The Kusarigama would become a historical curiosity, practiced in dojos but rarely seen in real combat. But Musashi's two-sword style, forged in duels like this one, would survive for centuries. Because in the end, it wasn't about which weapon was better. It was about who could adapt faster when everything went wrong. If you want to hear more stories about legendary warriors and the weapons that defined them, subscribe to the channel. We've got more duels, more steel, and more history coming your way. Until next time, stay sharp.